I bought the lot because I could see from the road that the fence didn't match the deed. I'm aware that this is not how most people choose a home. My name is Warren Tillis. Everyone calls me Wren. I'm 49 and I'm a licensed land surveyor specializing in boundary retracement, which means my whole job is walking into an argument between a piece of paper and the physical world and telling everyone which one is lying. It's the least glamorous discipline in a profession nobody thinks about. It is also, I promise you, the most merciless, because a boundary doesn't care what you built on it, what you paid for it, or how long you've been mowing it. 20 years of this has taught me one sentence I have said to more people than I can count, always to the same blank look. Your fence is not your property line. Your fence is a fence. Your line is a legal fiction pinned to the earth by iron rods, and the rods do not negotiate. So when I closed on a half-acre in Sugar Hollow Estates outside Nashville, I did what I do on Saturdays while other men mow. I found my own corners for fun. Metal detector, plat copy, a cold morning, coffee and a thermos. 3 of my 4 pins came up clean. Iron rods with plastic caps stamped with the developer's surveyor's license number, right where the recorded plat said they should be. The 4th came up bent. Bent and shallow and wearing a cap from a different licensee entirely, which meant somebody had pulled the original at some point and driven a replacement and hadn't been careful about it. I noted it in my field book because I note everything in my field book, and then I forgot about it for a year. I want you to remember it though. Everything that happened to 31 families on that street came down to one bent piece of iron that a lazy man couldn't be bothered to seat properly. Randy Doyle lived to my south, and Randy was a lot. 44, loud, a mechanic with forearms like fenders, and possessed of a backyard he loved the way some men love a boat. There was a koi pond. There was a smoker he'd built himself, and there were the gnomes. An entire ceramic militia, 30 or more, arranged in what he insisted was a formation, led by a 2-foot monster named Big Earl, with a fishing rod and a hand-painted expression of profound contentment. Randy introduced me to Big Earl by name at our first meeting, without irony. He also showed me the footage from his video doorbell, which he was extremely proud of, and which he mostly used to review raccoon activity. He made me watch 4 separate raccoon clips. I mention this because that doorbell is going to matter more than any instrument I own. Across from us were the Hendersons, Ray and Peg, 60-something, and radiant with the specific joy of people who have just decided to move closer to their grandkids. There was a realtor sign leaning against their garage that spring, waiting to go up. Peg told me about the little house in Chattanooga, 11 minutes from her daughter, with a room for the twins. I told her it sounded wonderful. It did sound wonderful. The year was quiet. Then Randy built. He'd been saving for it, and he went big. A detached garage, an expanded deck, and the centerpiece of a life's ambition, a large above-ground pool, the kind with the reinforced steel wall and the deck stairs, set on a compacted pad. I watched the concrete go in and felt the thing you feel when your professional eye clocks a problem 3 seconds before your neighborly instinct catches up. The garage slab was over my line. Not a lot. Around 4 feet at the northeast corner, with the pool pad clipping another 2. I did it right. I did it neighborly. I went over with a copy of the plat and a rolled-up print, and I started explaining. And here I'll admit my great personal failing. I cannot explain a boundary problem to a normal human being without beginning at the beginning, and the beginning is roughly 1785. I got about 90 seconds into the concept of monument control before Randy's face closed like a garage door. He heard one thing, and it wasn't the 18th century. He heard, "This guy wants my pool." He told me to get off his property, which, and I did not point this out at the time, which I consider heroic, was partly my property. So I went to the association, and that's where the whole thing turned strange. Charlene Pike had been president of the Sugar Hollow board since the subdivision opened. 61 years old, silver bob, permanent cardigan, the kind of woman who says, "Bless your heart," as a completed legal argument. I explained the encroachment calmly, with documentation, requesting nothing more than that the board acknowledge a survey issue existed between 2 lots. It was the mildest possible ask. She did not respond mildly. She responded fast, too fast,
the answer of someone who's had it ready for years, and she met me out at the property line to do it, on the sidewalk between our houses, which put her about 15 feet from Randy's beloved doorbell. "Mr. Tillis," she said, "that plat has suited everybody just fine for 11 years, and nobody has had a single problem with it until you showed up." Then she went home. I stood there turning that sentence over, because I hadn't said one word about the plat. I'd said Randy's garage was 4 feet over my line. A garage is a construction error. A plat is the map an entire subdivision is built from. She'd defended the map. Nobody defends the map unless somebody's attacked it before.
2 weeks later, I received a violation notice from the association for confrontational conduct toward neighbors and unauthorized markers placed in common areas. My stakes were not in common areas. My stakes were in my yard. But I framed the notice mentally and got to work, because there is only one appropriate response when a board with no authority over a survey suddenly develops strong feelings about a survey, and that response is a full retracement. Retracement is not the survey you're thinking of. It isn't measuring a yard. It's forensic archaeology. You go back to the original recorded plat at the Register of Deeds, you pull the developer's field notes if they exist, and then you go looking for the original monuments. The actual iron the original surveyor drove into the actual ground, because in Tennessee and nearly everywhere else, monuments control. If the iron in the earth disagrees with the number on the paper, the iron wins. The map is just somebody's opinion of the iron. So I walked Sugar Hollow, 31 lots, metal detector, probe, field book. And I couldn't find the original monuments. Not on my street, not on the next one. Gone. Or replaced with newer rods bearing other licensees' caps. Pins set later by someone who'd measured off a fence or a curb instead of the record, which is malpractice with a shovel. Somebody had, over years, quietly erased the physical evidence of where this subdivision was supposed to be. That absence was the loudest thing I have ever heard in a field, except for one. One original rod, bent, shallow, wearing the wrong cap. The one at the back of my own lot. Whoever went around pulling the developer's iron had gotten to that one, had a bad afternoon, bent it, and quit. I tied everything to that rod, and the answer came up so cleanly and so horribly that I sat down in the wet grass with my field book open on my knees and said a word out loud that I don't usually say. The subdivision was 11 feet off. Not Randy's garage, not Randy's pool, the entire plat. The developer's surveyor had set the whole grid 11 feet north of where the deeds put it, and then every house had been built to that bad grid, faithfully, one after another, for 11 years. Randy's garage wasn't on my land because Randy was a bad neighbor. Randy's garage was on my land because Randy's house was on Ray and Peg Henderson's land, and the Hendersons' house was on the lot behind them and on down the line, 31 houses, a row of dominoes that had already fallen and just hadn't been told yet. Every deed on that street described a rectangle of dirt with someone else's house sitting on it. And then I found the letter because a board member named Curtis had been carrying it in his stomach for a decade and gave it up the moment I asked the right question. 11 years ago, during a routine transaction, a title company had flagged an apparent discrepancy in the Sugar Hollow plat and written to the board. The board had quietly commissioned a check. The check came back, and the board, Charlene, had put it in a file and said nothing to anyone, ever. I understood the logic instantly, and it was the most chilling thing about her, because it wasn't stupid. Disclose it and 31 homes become unsellable overnight, the developer gets sued into vapor, and every property value on the street craters, including hers. Bury it, and people keep living in houses that are functionally fine. Nobody's roof cares whose dirt it's on. And here's the part that made my hands cold. Tennessee recognizes adverse possession, and with color of title, a deed you believe in, taxes you pay, a house you occupy openly. The clock can run in 7 years. Charlene hadn't buried that letter out of panic. She'd buried it and let the clock run.
11 years of silence wasn't cowardice. It was a waiting strategy, and every neighbor who smiled at her at the mailbox was a piece on the board.
Which is also, and I want to be precise about this, exactly why I could not simply go knock on Randy's door with the good news and let us both sleep on it, because the clock was running on me too. Randy's garage had been sitting on my 4 feet for over a year, openly, under a deed he believed in, on taxes he paid. Nothing in the law cares that his encroachment was innocent. Innocence is what starts the clock, not what stops it. 6 more years of me being polite about it, and that ground stops being mine in any sense a court will recognize. The only thing that stops possession from ripening is the record owner asserting the boundary, physically, visibly, on the ground. Stakes. That's the whole remedy. A surveyor who knows his line is being taken and says nothing because it would be awkward is a surveyor who is choosing, slowly, to lose. Silence was the exact instrument Charlene had used to beat an entire street. I wasn't going to hand her the same weapon and call it good manners. So I did what I'm licensed to do. I went into my own yard and I set stakes on the true line. Legal, correct, my property, my right, and necessary. And the true line ran directly through the corner of Randy Doyle's brand new pool. He came out of that house like a dog off a porch. What followed is the least dignified 15 minutes of my professional life and is, I'm reliably informed, the funniest thing that has ever happened on that street. Randy pulled my stakes. I put them back. He pulled them again and threw them in his koi pond. I got new stakes out of my truck because I am a man who has 40 stakes in his truck, and I set them again, silently, which I now understand was more provoking than anything I could have said. On the 3rd round, he stopped debating and simply tackled me. We went into the gnomes. I want to be clear that I didn't throw the first punch, or, honestly, most of the punches. But I am not a small man, and I did not lie there. We rolled through Randy's ceramic militia, which detonated around us in a hail of pointed hats. Big Earl went over the koi pond in a graceful 2-foot arc and lost his fishing rod on impact. We both went into the pond after him. The koi, to their credit, kept their composure. Randy got a hand on my collar and hauled me up, and I got a shoulder into his chest, and we staggered. Locked together, soaking, roaring, straight into the wall of that magnificent above-ground pool. It didn't burst so much as surrender. The seam unzipped from the top rail down, and 4 feet of chlorinated water came out sideways in one enormous silver sheet and took us both off our feet, along with 14 gnomes, a cooler, and the smoker. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, the automatic sprinklers came on. Randy came up out of the flood with a pool noodle and hit me with it. I want to be honest, it was the noodle that broke me. I started laughing while a 44-year-old man beat me with foam. He got me in a headlock with an inflatable flamingo somehow involved, and at that exact moment, I realized I still had my grade rod in my left hand. I had never let go of it, not once, not through the tackle or the gnomes or the pond. And while being throttled by a flamingo, I checked, purely by reflex, that the bubble was still level. It was. That rod cost $300. And that's when Charlene arrived, because of course she did, marching up the driveway to restore order in her cardigan. 1 instant before the second surge from the collapsing pool came around the garage and hit her at knee height. She went down. She got up, and she was, at last, absolutely and completely done pretending. "You!" she screamed at me, dripping, standing 12 feet from Randy's doorbell. "You couldn't leave it alone. That plat has been wrong since the day they built it. Every one of these houses is 11 feet off. We all knew. We handled it. 11 years I have held this street together, and you come in with your little sticks." She stopped. You could see the exact moment she hurt herself. Randy let go of me. We sat down in the mud, both of us, in a foot of pool water surrounded by casualties. He was breathing hard. He said, "What'd she just say?" So I reached into my back pocket and took out the plat, which was soaked through and coming apart at the folds, and I flattened it on my knee. And I didn't start in 1785. I just put my finger on it. "This is your house," I said. "This is your lot." And I moved my finger 11 feet. He looked at the paper. He looked at his house. He looked, slowly, across the street at Ray and Peg Henderson's place, where the sold writer had gone up on the sign 2 days before. "So He stopped, started again. "My house is on Ray's land? Your house is on Ray's land." Randy Doyle sat in the wreckage of his life's ambition, wearing a gnome hat on his shoulder, and said the truest thing anyone said that entire year. Then who the hell was I fighting you for? Here is the great tragedy of Sugar Hollow, and Randy will tell you about it at length if you let him. Not 1 second of that fight exists on video. The doorbell watches the front. 14 gnomes died in obscurity. But the doorbell had a clean angle on the driveway, and the driveway is where Charlene Pike stood and shrieked, and it had also been sitting there for 11 weeks with something else on it that nobody had any reason to look at. I asked Randy to pull the older clip. He found it in about 4 minutes between raccoons. There she was, on a quiet afternoon, in a dry cardigan, calm, pleasant, unhurried, saying to a man who had asked her about a garage, "That plat has suited everybody just fine for 11 years. Randy cut the two together himself on his phone, badly, with a hard jump between them. 11 seconds of a woman telling you nothing was wrong. 11 seconds of the same woman, soaked, screaming that everything had always been wrong and she'd known the whole time. He sent it to one group chat. It went down that street in about 18 hours. What followed was not a lawsuit so much as a demolition. 31 families discovered simultaneously that their home stood on their neighbor's land. Curtis produced the buried title letter. Title insurance claims went in by the fistful, and no title company on earth would write a new policy in Sugar Hollow, which meant not one house on that street could be sold, refinanced, or borrowed against. The Hendersons' closing died on the spot. Peg standing in her kitchen holding a paint chip for a room in Chattanooga she'd already picked out. The street filed a collective quiet title action to untangle 31 boundaries, plus suit against the developer, plus a complaint to the state licensing board against the surveyor whose cap sat on every wrong rod out there. And then somebody checked Charlene's lot. Her house sat perfectly, dead center, all 4 corners true, the only correct home in Sugar Hollow Estates. Because when she'd built 11 years ago, knowing what she knew, she'd quietly had her own pins reset to the deed. She hadn't just known. She'd known well enough to save herself. And then she'd walked past her neighbors at the mailbox every single morning for 11 years. She was gone from the board within a week. Not for the money. She never took a dollar. For the mornings. The quiet title case is still grinding. Those take years. Most of it will land on the developer's insurer, and eventually everybody will hold a corrected deed to land they can finally prove is theirs. Ray and Peg will get to Chattanooga. Late, but they'll get there. Randy and I rebuilt the pool last month, on the south side of the line. His side, correct, permanent. He glued Big Earl back together himself, badly, with a seam running right across the hat, and set him at the corner where the new pin went in. I drove the rod myself and seated it deep and set the cap with my own license number stamped on it. First honest monument on that street in 11 years. Randy stood over it with a beer and looked down the line. "Is it straight?" "It's straight." "Huh," he said, and then, "Want a rib?" Charlene Pike's house is the only one on that street standing exactly where the deed says it should. Sit with that for a second, because it's the whole case. She didn't pocket a dollar. She just got the survey right for herself 11 years ago, and then let 31 families keep sleeping on land that wasn't theirs, and said good morning to every one of them at the mailbox. The rest of her mistakes fall out of that one. She defended the plat before anyone had attacked it, which is how Wren knew a garage argument was really a subdivision secret. She let the adverse possession clock run, betting silence would launder the whole thing into permanence. And she screamed the truth in range of a doorbell camera her neighbor pointed at raccoons, 11 weeks after saying the opposite in a dry cardigan on the same driveway in the same frame. 3 things worth carrying out of this. Monuments control. The iron in the ground is your line, not the fence, not the tape measure, not the map. Being polite about an encroachment isn't neutral. Those clocks run on silence, and only an asserted boundary stops them. And a board that panics at a survey question is a board answering a different question than the one you asked. Now be honest with me. You find out your house sits 11 feet onto your neighbor's land, and his onto the next. Do you say it out loud, or do you become Charlene? Tell me below.